The prairie burned quietly. Ash whispered across the dead grass, carried on a wind that smelled of blood and splinters. The sun was sinking behind a cracked ridge, spilling copper light over the husk of a homestead that had once echoed with cooking pots and cradle songs. Now it creaked with fire's memory. She lay half covered by scorched quilts, her hand blistered and curled around the edge of a broken water pail. Dirt smudged her cheekbone. Blood matted her temple. The bodice of her dress had been torn in the struggle by the fire or the men who rode away. She couldn't remember. Only the heat, the shouting, the sound of horses too far to stop, and the single dry word of her husband before he vanished. Leave her. She watched them ride on without her. Faces turned forward, not back. It had been a long way down from the porch when the flames took the wall. Her leg had twisted beneath her weight, like a branch snapping under snow. Now the light changed. Dusk leaned in. Coyotes sang. Something moved. At first, she thought it was death come soft-footed, draped in furs and shadows. A figure approached the ruins, slow, watchful, silent. A long rifle slung across his back, feathers tied at the stock. His face was painted in streaks of ash. The beads at his neck clinked like bones. She blinked up at him. Her throat was too dry to scream. He crouched, eyes steady, unreadable. A breath passed between them. "Are you?" she tried to ask, but her voice came out cracked as the dirt. The pain swelled again in her ankle, sharp and white-hot, but she refused to flinch. He touched the edge of her shawl with the tip of his finger, pulled it aside just enough to see the wound. He said nothing, just shifted the blanket back over her chest, then stood. For a moment, she thought he would leave her too, but he walked to what remained of the barn, rummaged through blackened boards, and returned with a water canteen, still warm from hiding near the trough. He knelt again, tilted it to her lips. The water was tinny and warm, but she drank like someone who had already died once. His hands were scarred. Deep old burns crisscrossed his palms, maybe from war, maybe not. When she looked into his face, she didn't see kindness. She saw endurance, the kind of silence that came after many winters. He didn't speak English. Or, if he did, he kept it buried behind his teeth. By the time full dark came, he had fashioned a crude litter from what was left of the fence slats and horse tack. He bound her twisted ankle tight with a strip torn from his own deerskin shirt, his fingers working quickly, but not roughly. She watched the stars appear through the smoke. She didn't ask why he was helping her. She didn't ask where he was taking her. The questions ached in her bones, but she was too tired to lift them. The wind shifted. The ruin behind them coughed a last spark, then fell silent. The only sound left was a whisper of his boots on dry earth as he dragged her away from what remained of her life. They traveled under moonlight, across hard soil and rock beds, past sleeping cacti and brittle sage. Coyotes watched but didn't follow. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called once, then again, and fell silent. Her head lolled back, bumping gently against the wooden frame. Pain flared and dulled. She began to drift. Memories came in pieces. The wedding veil sewn by her mother. The way her husband used to lie about the price of cattle. The girl she once taught to sing hymns by firelight. The man she saw now, pulling her through the dark, his back straight, his breath even, didn't belong to any of them. He was something from before those memories, from the land beneath them all. She woke to firelight. It cracked softly between stones. Smoke rose through a narrow gap in the rocks above. They were in a shallow cave, hidden between split boulders. He had lit the fire with skill and little sound. Beside it, a pot simmered. The smell of herbs and something bitter filled the space. He knelt again. His eyes never asked permission. He tore a piece of soft leather and chewed something dark, then spat it into a bowl and mixed it with water. When he pressed it to her wound, she cursed through her teeth. He didn't react, just wrapped it with care, binding it tight. He tied it with a strip of sinew and offered her a piece of something flat and dried. She didn't take it. Silence fell again. Not empty silence, asterisk intentional star. It had weight, like snow waiting to fall. She watched him as he stared into the flames. His expression didn't change, but there was a heaviness in the slope of his shoulders. He looked like a man used to sitting alone. At last she spoke. "They left me." Still no answer. "My own people. My own man. I burned while they ran. She didn't expect a response. But something flickered at the edge of his gaze. Recognition, maybe, or memory. She laid back. The rock beneath her was cold, but her ankle throbbed less. The poultice was working. Her breathing slowed. "You gonna sell me?" she asked. "Trade me?" He looked over then, held her gaze, slowly shook his head. A pause. "Why, then?" He said nothing, but in the way he turned back to the fire, in the way he placed another log like it might wake if dropped too hard, she saw the answer. He wasn't saving her. He was keeping her. Not as property, not as prisoner, as something else. She didn't know what yet. Maybe he didn't either. Outside, the wind rose again. It hissed through the rocks and circled the cave like a question without an answer. She closed her eyes, not in peace, but surrender. She had survived the fire. Now she had to survive whatever came next. And beside her, the man who said nothing kept watch with eyes that had already seen too much. Dawn broke without sound. The red sun climbed slowly over the canyon rim, washing the stone walls in rust and gold. Wind skimmed across the ledges, stirring dust and dry leaves. Somewhere below, a coyote barked once, sharp as flint, then fell quiet. She woke to that silence, more alive than rest. Her leg pulsed, but the pain had settled into something dull and constant, like an old grudge. The fire had burned down to embers. He was already up, silhouetted against the entrance, sharpening a blade that looked older than memory. For a moment, she just watched him. The Navajo man moved with the quiet grace of someone who didn't ask permission from the land, but had earned its trust. His body bore stories. A jagged scar across his left shoulder, another like a lightning strike down his forearm. Sunlight caught in the beads of his wrist, each tied with thread so fine it must have taken hours to finish. She sat up slowly, gritting her teeth against the ache in her ribs. He glanced back just once, then tossed her a piece of dry cornbread wrapped in hide. It was rough, tasteless, but filled a space inside her that had been hollow too long. They didn't speak. He hadn't spoken since the night he found her. Still, she began to notice the language between his silences. He pointed to the sky when vultures passed, tapped his fingers once, twice when a noise disturbed the brush. When he offered her water, he always waited for her to drink first. And when they walked, well, he walked and she limped. He adjusted his pace without drawing attention to it. The trail they followed wasn't marked by any road. It bent and disappeared, reappearing in places only he seemed to understand. Sometimes she saw stone markers tucked between trees, feathers tied to branches, or handprints smeared in faded clay. She stopped asking what they meant when he never answered. She'd stopped asking a lot of things. Instead, she watched. The way he spoke to the land with his hands. The way he listened without turning his head. The way children sometimes stared at her, then ran behind huts when they reached the edge of the village. The canyon settlement was carved into the bones of the earth, low and wide and hidden behind crooked bluffs. No fences, no guards. Just watchful eyes and the sense that nothing here was ever truly still. The people didn't welcome her, but they didn't cast her out, either. An old woman gave her a small space beneath a stretched hide awning, a sleeping mat, a crack bowl, a strip of dried meat too hard to chew. The first night, she didn't sleep. She watched the fires flicker between the stones, heard the laughter of children who had never heard her name, and wondered what it meant to survive something so completely that no one else even knew it happened. He didn't come that night, nor the next, but she saw him at dawn again, standing with 3 others near the canyon rim, watching the horizon like it owed them something. Time passed differently here, slow, layered. Wounds that would have festered in town healed beneath poultices made of bitter root and smoke. Her ankle improved. She practiced walking alone, hands brushing the canyon wall for balance. She fetched water. She helped grind maize. The women never spoke to her unless necessary, and the men barely looked her way. But the children began to hover nearby. One brought her a painted stone. Another mimicked her limp until she laughed and shooed him away. She didn't belong. But she did not belong. It was the land itself that began to teach her first. She learned that the wind here came from 4 directions, and each one carried a different warning. That water had memory. That some trails were meant only for those who had lost enough to walk them. One afternoon, while walking the dry creek, she found a warrior again, alone this time, kneeling beside a small buried fire. He was humming low, a sound that felt older than voice. She didn't speak. She sat across from him and waited. He looked up at her with something unreadable, then nodded once and passed her a bundle wrapped in hide. Inside, a carved bone comb, a piece of sky-colored cloth, and a strip of rawhide twisted into a circle. She stared at it. "It's not marriage," a voice said behind her. Startled, she turned. A woman stood there, older, eyes sharp, mouth tired. Her English was thick but steady. "It's a promise," the woman said. "He chose not to leave you. That means something." She didn't answer. She only looked at the ring. Later, as night fell, she sat beneath the awning and held in her palm. The hide was still warm from his hands. The strip wound tight, strong. She didn't put it on. Not yet. The next morning brought danger with the dawn. A rider appeared at the edge of the canyon. Not one of them. Too clean, too straight-backed, with boots polished and a revolver resting easy on his hip. He didn't enter. He just stood to rise, letting his shadow fall long across the dust. The people grew quiet. Eyes turned toward the stranger like sunflowers to the sun, only with suspicion instead of awe. She stepped forward, against every instinct, and stared. The rider touched the brim of his hat, smiled, too wide. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "They said you were dead." She knew that voice. His name wasn't worth remembering, but his face was familiar. He had ridden with her husband once, one of the men who called themselves clean-up boys after raids. The kind who brought rope before questions. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Got orders," he said. "You're wanted back east. Deserter, some say. Abandoned your post during a federal crossing. Others say you ran off with Apache gold." She narrowed her eyes. "You know that's not true." "Don't matter." He smiled again. "Truth's just a story folks ain't heard yet. You come quiet, we settle it quick." She looked at the warrior. He'd appear behind her, silent as always, his gaze locked on the rider. "No," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." The rider's smile slipped just a little. "Well then," he said, dropping something in the dirt between them. "A bullet, polished, wrapped in red cloth. Next time, I won't be asking." He turned and rode off. Silence returned, but it was not peace. She stared at the bullet, then picked it up with 2 fingers. The cloth was soaked in something that smelled like iron and dust. She turned toward the warrior, opened her mouth, but the question died before it reached her lips. He took the bullet, pocketed it, then nodded once. They both knew now. The past hadn't died in the fire. It had just found a new trail, and it was coming. Rain came hard, sudden and cold. It pounded the stone canyon like fists on a coffin lid, soaking the cracked earth and sending rivulets through the village paths. Smoke curled low from cook fires choked by wet air. Children huddled beneath hides. Dogs tucked into the shadows. She stood at the edge of the cliff, shawl clinging to her shoulders, hair wet and tangled against her neck. Below, the red dust had turned to rust-colored mud. Behind her, the village moved with the quiet of people who'd seen storms bring more than water. He stood beside her, the warrior, his arms crossed and his face unreadable. For days he'd been watchful, listening to the wind like it carried more than weather. When she spoke now, it was without turning. "He'll come back," she said. The warrior didn't answer, but his fingers tightened around the stone pendant at his chest. A week had passed since the rider left the bullet and the warning. She kept the red cloth wrapped around it, hidden beneath the floor mat of her hut. Each night she heard in her dreams, spinning, clicking, chambering itself in some unseen revolver. A reminder, a promise. The village had changed, subtly. Eyes lingered longer when she passed. Conversations fell quiet when she entered. No one said anything outright, but the tension pressed like a blade against the skin. Her presence had always been tolerated, but now it was a question left hanging in the air. The old woman, the healer, found her one morning kneeling by the river, washing the bandage from her ankle. "You draw ghosts," she said in her gravel voice. "Your past walks louder than your footsteps." "I didn't invite it," she replied. "That doesn't mean it won't sit at your fire." Later that day, the warrior returned with news. A trail of riders had been spotted northeast, settler scouts, half uniformed, skirting the edge of tribal hunting grounds. It was clear now she wasn't the only one they wanted. They were mapping the land again, preparing something. That night, beside the fire, she finally spoke the truth she'd buried deep enough to rot. My husband sold out a Navajo camp 6 years ago. Said they were hiding weapons. Women, children, it didn't matter. He got a bonus. I stayed silent. The warrior didn't speak. She kept going. I was there. I watched the fire start. One of the women had a child in her arms. She begged. I said nothing. I let it happen. I thought being silent made me innocent. Now he looked at her. His eyes didn't soften. They never did. But something shifted in the space between them, like the earth moving beneath shallow roots. You carry the ash, he said quietly. I do. The next morning, they rode out. She hadn't been on a horse since the fire. Her ankle ached with every rise and fall of the trail, but she didn't complain. They followed a dry riverbed deep into the rocklands where the old ones had once carved prayers into the cliffs. There, buried beneath a boulder split by time, they uncovered what her husband had hidden years before. Rifles, wrapped in tar cloth, rusted but usable. Enough to start a war. The warrior stared at them, jaw tight. He was planning to come back, she said. He nodded. He never left. They burned half the weapons. The rest they took with them, buried deeper, scattered across sacred ground. When they returned, the rider was already waiting. He wasn't alone this time, for others stood with him. 2 of them settlers, 2 wearing the gray and blue patchwork of border militia. The flag they carried was faded, its meaning hollow. The villagers stood back. No one moved. Even the children were silent. She stepped forward, alone, and faced them. The rider grinned. You're making quite the mess out here. You already made it, she said. I just stopped pretending it wasn't there. You belong to the East. You married into it. You wear its sins. I buried that man, she said, voice steady. And now I'm burying what he left behind. The warrior appeared beside her, rifle slung casually but his eyes sharp. The others shifted at his presence. Step aside, the rider barked. We came for her. No, the warrior said, the word low but firm. The rider narrowed his eyes. This ain't your law. No, the warrior said again, but it's our land. Something in the tone made even the soldiers pause. The standoff stretched long. Rain had started again, light and cold. It tapped against a stone like a clock ticking down. Then a boy stepped forward, barely 12, holding a bough too large for his arms. He stood beside her, shaking but didn't move away. Others followed. 2 women, an old man, another child. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. She saw the rider's gaze shift, saw the hesitation. Fear, maybe, or something worse, doubt. You're protecting a traitor, he said finally. No, the old healer said from the crowd. We're protecting what she chose to become. The rider looked at the village one last time, then turned his horse. Next time, he said, I won't ask. They left without a shot fired. As the hoofbeats faded, the warrior stepped forward and dropped the red cloth into the fire. The bullet inside hissed, then cracked. A small final sound. That night, she sat beside him beneath the stars. Neither spoke. The wind was softer now. The village behind them had returned to its rhythm. But they both knew the silence wouldn't last. The fire was coming again. And this time, she would not run. The sky broke open at dusk. Storm clouds churned like smoke above the hills. Thunder crawling low across the plain. The wind carried the scent of gun oil and wet leather. In the shadow of the old mission ruins, beneath crumbling stone and splintered beams, she waited. Mud clung to her boots. Her fingers wrapped tightly around the hilt of the knife she'd once used for skinning rabbits. Now it waited for a man's throat. He stood nearby, silent, eyes fixed on the broken archway ahead. The warrior said nothing, as always, but his breath had changed. Slower, heavier, like a man stepping into his own grave. She reached out and touched his arm. If this goes wrong, she said, don't trade your life for mine. His jaw tensed, but he didn't look at her. I already did, he said. A crack of lightning illuminated the stained glass shards still clinging to the mission windows. Saints shattered. Their colors faded into the mortar. This was where the rider had chosen to end it. Not in court, not with chains, but here, on the border where law dissolved into dust and ghosts. She heard the horses before she saw them. 5 of them, maybe more. Rain had begun to fall again, thin and needling. The sound of hooves grew louder, echoed by the sharp clink of spurs. The rider came first, of course, soaked through but grinning like a man who believed this ending belonged to him. "I gave you a chance," he called. "You wasted it." She stepped into the open, knife at her hip, heart beating slow and deep. "No," she said. "I didn't." He dismounted, boots sinking into the wet ground. Behind him, the others stayed mounted, watchers, maybe executioners. She couldn't tell which. "Your kind always thinks you're new," he said, approaching, like sin doesn't stain twice. "I know the stain," she said. "I carried it long enough." He laughed. "Then you know what's waiting for you after this." She didn't reply. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled free the ring of braided rawhide. She held it out, steady, and dropped it in the dirt between them. "That was your cousin's last gift," she said. "That and fire." The rider's face shifted, just slightly, but she saw the recognition, the memory that flickered behind his eyes. He remembered the way her husband screamed when the fire circled back, how she hadn't even looked for water, just walked away. "You think the savages make you clean?" he sneered. "You think dressing in their beads changes who you are?" "No," she said, "but it changed what I'll die for." The warrior moved then, stepping beside her, rifle raised but not aimed. His presence was enough. It always had been. "I only want one," the rider said to the others. "The rest of you ride." But no one moved. That was when the boy appeared. Small, barefoot, mud on his knees and hands. He stepped from behind a pillar, dragging something in both arms. A long-barreled rifle, old but loaded. He stood beside her and raised it with trembling fingers. "She's ours," the boy said. A pause. Then 2 more children appeared. Then an old woman. Then the healer. No weapons. Just bodies standing in the storm, facing men who'd never been told no by anyone who wasn't holding a badge. "You want her," the healer said, voice hoarse, then walked through all of us. The rider looked from one to the next, soaked now, his fury masked by something smaller, uncertainty. This wasn't a battle. It was exposure. "She's a murderer," he barked. "No," said the warrior. "She is a witness." The wind kicked up. Rain slanted harder, stinging skin. The rider took 1 step forward, and the boy, brave and shaking, clicked the hammer back. It was that sound that ended it. Not a shot, not a shout, just a click. The rider turned, said nothing, mounted his horse and rode off. The others followed. It was over, but not quiet. The mission held its silence. The sky wept for something older than the moment, and she stood there soaked and shivering, unable to move. The warrior stepped close. He took her hand, not to lead, not to claim, just to remind. They walked out together, not chased, not claimed, just walking. That night, the village burned nothing. No smoke, no fire, just quiet meals and dry blankets in the eyes of children who had learned that ghosts could be chased away. She sat by the river in the dark, the rawhide ring in her palm. Her fingers closed over slowly, like burying a seed. He sat beside her. "What now?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, just looked at the sky, where stars had begun to pierce the retreating storm. "Now," he said finally, "we build. Not fences, not walls, but stories of survival, of change, of fire that didn't consume, only clear the land for something new." And behind them, the canyon breathed again. Quiet, watchful, home.